All right, so week 6, straightforward. Not sure if you've looked at this. Aside from a lovely thunderstorm, this is funny. I don't know why, but colleges always pride themselves on never closing. Like when I went to Ohio State, it's the same thing. Like we never close. It's like talking to your 90-year-old grandfather that talks about trudging through snow to get there. The one day that we probably would have had to say, we're closed, we have a rest day anyway, right? So whatever, the odds, this is what happens. But anyway, if you do have to drive somewhere, hopefully you're leaving sooner than later. I plan on getting out of here pretty much right after this. The week 6 overview is pretty straightforward. Really, I think what we're going to do is maybe kind of after today, this is going to be it. I don't want to toss anything else at you. If you've been following along with chapter 4, we're not covering everything that goes through the body, just kind of the major highlights. And wherever we end today is where stuff will end. Does that make sense? So you've got the 2 review quizzes. I'll post another review of the quiz that we had last week, just like I did before. So look for the quiz review. And then, of course, we have the exam. It'll open up on Thursday morning. It'll close Sunday at midnight. It's literally just a big quiz. You've had the practice quizzes. It's just longer. It's just one of those, just a little bit longer. Randomized, just like maybe you kind of picked up on that, the questions come at you in different forms. So they all come from a question pool, so no 2 exams are alike. Similar, obviously, same material. But any questions you have, just bombard me until Thursday morning and even after that. So you don't feel like you have to take it right away on Thursday. Just take it whenever you're ready. If it's Sunday at 9 o'clock at night, it's Sunday at 9. It doesn't really matter. So anytime between Thursday and Sunday, just make sure you do that. Chapters 1, chapters 2, and then 4. And of course, we've got the outside stuff, right? So we've added, kind of see how this goes. The book is only about maybe 50-60% of the material. So, but just let me know. That's really it. So just review stuff. You're here today. Congratulations. Well, let's get started. So this will close out the stuff that we're going to talk about for the exam. Kind of focused last week on, at least a big part of last week, was that random error camp. Right? That camp of aging that talks about how getting older is just a simple set of diseases that we can just try to slowly eradicate, and then maybe we'll live to be 200 years old. There are some, I guess it depends on how you look at it. Some people would just call these things that happen. But if you have that mindset, they do have names. These would be 3 diseases of aging that you're probably not going to be able to avoid no matter what you do. In fact, there's probably also not really a way to slow them down necessarily, although people have come up with lots of products for you to potentially try to slow it down or maybe even reverse it. But by and large, these are 3 diseases of aging that are going to happen. I shouldn't say they're inevitable. I guess put it this way, the degree to which they impact you is somewhat in your control, but they are going to happen to you no matter what. So a lot of us can walk around and say, I'm never going to get polio. Congratulations. Well, unfortunately, you are going to suffer from sarcopenia. It may not affect you the same way it does your neighbor, but you are going to get sarcopenia. Doesn't that sound fun? I can't wait until I get sarcopenia. What are these? It's out of sheer curiosity. Maybe you're reading ahead. Maybe you get bored with your roommates and sit down and read your adulthood and aging books. Just for fun. Just for you. Any idea what these are? Even one of them? Our health classes in public schools are doing such a good job. One of these should really stick out to you. So so this is fantastic. I always make my lectures assuming no one's read anything. Yeah?
Alopecia is like hair loss, isn't it?
There we go. So androgenetics, say that out loud. Alopecia has something to do with your hair. We'll get there. What about sarcopenia? It's just fun to say. Try it out loud. Sounds like an Italian disease. Oh, the sarcopenia. The what? What is that? I don't even know what that is.
No, it's like,
Oh, there we go. I never knew some. What's your major?
biology.
Sweet. So of course you're gonna know something I don't know about that. What do you call a sarcomere? And that's in your muscles? It's fantastic. It has everything to do with your muscles. That's not even mentioned in your book. You learn something new every day. Not to give it up and give the lecture later on in a little bit. And then what about climacteric? This is the one I thought everyone would know, actually. No ideas? Well, we'll save. It'll be a surprise. I know you're gonna like a half hour. You're gonna be on the edge of your seat. So we'll get there. But let's start. Of course, this is the one that we talked about with the baby toupees. Androgenetic alopecia. Since you probably have that written down, let's start here on the left. So when it comes to your hair, the online lecture last week was all about mainly your skin. That was a big focus of it. Oh, your hair is also something that's obviously going to change. Is it the most critical thing that changes in your life? Probably not. I hope it's not. But it's something that you're definitely going to change. So let's start there on the left. I was going to start there on the right since it's on top, but you probably have this written down. Androgenetic alopecia is the technical term for the disease that leads to a human being losing some of their hair, if not all of their hair. What you may not know, though, is that's actually not what's happening. A lot of people just think, well, your hair is just falling out and you stop making hair, right? That's actually not true at all. What happens, though, is you have these germination centers. If you remember from the lecture last week, you saw the 3 different layers of the skin. You have the epidermis, the dermis, and then, of course, you have the hypodermis with all the fat that you actually want. It keeps you nice and warm and smooth and all that stuff. Inside the epidermis, or excuse me, the dermis, that second layer, you have all of these germination centers where the follicles are at. What happens is they just get different instructions. They get told to make something entirely different. Some of them, yes. Some of them do get eradicated and just simply stop working. But actually, for most of them, that's not what happens. They just start producing a different product. It's like if you had a car factory that produced SUVs, one day it just decides, you know what? I've made too many freaking SUVs. I'm tired of it. I'm going to start making some sedans. That's exactly what the germination centers do. Terminal hair is this. It's this lovely stuff you can run your fingers through and go to the barber and get it cut, and oh, everything's lovely. Terminal hairs are awesome. Vellus hairs, however, are what you start producing. Terminal hairs have the pigment. They're long, they're thick, they're visible, they grow, they grow, they grow. Vellus hairs are actually so tiny, you can only see them in some cases through a microscope. You'd actually have to get a microscope and look at the top of your head, and you realize, oh, you're not really bald at all. In fact, you're still producing hair. The problem is the hair that you're producing is so tiny, no one can see it. It's not pigmented. It's extremely thin. Maybe you learned something today. You're actually not bald. I just can't see your hair. And a lot of them, like literally, again, you have to look really, really, really close at the scalp. They're barely like poking out of the scalp, like so tiny, like you would, it's ridiculous what's happening. So the germination centers, they just decide. So what are people working on? Like I always think of the Aubrey de Graves. Whenever I think of someone, I can't get his face out of my head. Someone like him somewhere is working on how to get in there and tell the germination center to switch back to making terminal hair. So if you're wondering where is the science going, there are people working, and there's a little blurb in your book how the next generation might have to deal with the disease of going bald or anything like this. That's what they're working on. They're working on trying to prevent those germination centers. Why? Why did you switch? Why did you go? If we can crack that code of why you stopped making the terminal hair, you could technically learn how to stop male pattern baldness, which would be awesome. So 90% of men, 95% of men, that's what you've been wondering this whole time. What's the 95 of the 20? It affects almost every man on the planet to some extent. 95%. And only 20% of women, although it does affect a significant amount of women. So I think a lot of people think women are somehow free of this. It's not true. It's still a significant amount. It's largely genetic. The other one is going gray. This is what I was going to start with. Maybe another misunderstanding of what's actually going on. The hair does not actually turn gray. at all. I get it. You look at someone and you think, oh, you're growing gray hair now. No, that's actually not true at all. You're learning, I can tell. It's exciting. What? Come on, Dr. Meyer. So you're telling me my hair's not falling out and my hair's not going gray, but I know it's what you see. Again, we're kind of dealing with a factory that's going a little bit haywire. Those same germination centers that are producing also get different instructions. There's also a melanin component to this. Melanin is a pigment that they're supposed to produce to inject in the hair. My brain, when I think of this, is like a cartoon. There's a little factory and a bunch of workers. Well, the guys whose job it is, like, let's see, the hair is moving down the assembly line, they're supposed to inject it with melanin, they all go on strike. The weird thing is, you're still producing melanin in your body, but the hair no longer receives it. So when you see someone with a gray hair, and then right then it starts to turn white, and white, there are degrees to this. What happens is the germination centers just put less and less and less melanin inside the hair. By age 75, 100% of the population sees some degree of graying or whiting of the hair. But of course, this varies. I went to a kid in high school. He was already completely gray. Anyone else have someone like that? There's usually one in your high school. Anderson Cooper, okay, from CNN. You ever see him? He's been gray like this entire time. When I see Anderson Cooper, in fact, it's kind of funny. He was actually on a news show when I was a kid, way back in the 90s. And he was already white and gray back then. So it does vary. Did I tell you guys the product that they make for men? Kind of always talk about the double standard, right? I mean, there's tons of products you can buy to make your hair not grow gray. Did I tell you about some of you were surprised, right? So some men who don't have any gray go to Walmart and buy a product that's called Touch of Gray. But the idea being, I need some gray hair. So men actually buy products to make themselves look older. It's just a beautiful, beautiful dichotomy there. So hair, that's one thing. Body build is another thing that changes over time. You may have not noticed this yet because you're only 21, maybe 22 years old, maybe a little bit less. But let's say you go to your 25-year class reunion, it's very possible you won't recognize at all a lot of the people that you see 25 years later until you look really close in their eyes, like, oh, there you are. Why? Because as the years go by, our body build shifts quite a bit. So first, another question, do we actually shrink? Have you ever heard this idea that we get shorter? Is that true or not?
No, actually, you're just, we're just like.
There we go. So it's a little bit of a misnomer. Number one, yes, we actually do shrink. In fact, from your adult mature height, let's say you're 6'2", like I am. Well, by the time I am 90, I'm probably only going to be 6'1", maybe even 6 feet. It varies a little bit. But on average, once a person enters old age, they've lost a whole inch of height. This would be terrible if you're like right on the borderline of being able to ride a roller coaster at like Cedar Point. Like, damn it! I swear I rode it last year. No, totally. But she's exactly right. So we don't actually like wither. We're not like shrinking, like losing cells or something that are falling off. What happens is the vertebrae in your back get compressed. You lose bone actually in your vertebrae, and your spine over time just compresses on itself. So you literally are about an inch shorter by the time you hit those old years. But also the shape of us changes as well. I don't know why I feel the need to draw this, but you probably know what an inverted U looks like. But this is kind of what we're looking at. This would be a timeline. Super helpful for the online lecture, isn't it? That I come over here and let's say this is about age 50. This is not to scale, by the way. This is, when you think of your own life, this would be about age 85. When we just think of just pounds in general, just how much you actually weigh, we actually typically see like an inverted U, meaning from around age 20 to around age 50. And again, this is by no means to scale, because if you look at like, oh my God, I'm going to gain 185 pounds. No, you're going to steadily, though, gain weight up until about age 50 or so. And then, even people who are largely overweight, between the 50s and 60s, we actually start to see a decline into older age. So we see this inverted U. But, oh, and by the way, the middle age spread is what we call what happens to most people when they hit 50s, 60s, 65, et cetera, et cetera. Is that inevitable? Is that something that has to happen? Of course not. We're just talking average-wise. So where we gain the weight is typically in the hips and also, of course, in the gut as well, which is related to a whole host of things like heart disease, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not something that we necessarily want to do, but it does happen. We call this the middle age spread. What we lose, however, because this might sound like good news. Oh, great, we're all going on diets and losing weight as we get older. That's actually not exactly true. What people generally lose is something called FFM, which stands for fat-free mass. So people actually aren't necessarily losing what they would want to lose. What they're actually losing is the fat-free mass. Mainly muscle tone, which is actually denser and weighs more. So that's technically why we see a drop in weight. And of course, just one thing to point out, and again, we can get into debates of how effective this actually is. It's just one marker. What we use in this country to measure whether or not someone's overweight or obese, especially even in kids, is something called the BMI. Ever heard of this? You probably heard of this, right? It's not perfect by any means. In fact, a lot of people that you look at and you're like, wait a second, that person's not overweight. They technically have a BMI that says they're overweight. Like, what? So it's by no means perfect. It's just one indicator. But it is interesting to point out. You can go on, if you've never done it before, you can simply go click on BMI calculator. I believe it's your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters squared. Wow, I can't believe I remember. That's like remember the Pythagorean theorem. But again, just go to BMI calculator. Healthy is considered anywhere between 18.5 and 24.9. That's considered okay. So that's a pretty big range. The United States, again, for what it's worth, is the BMI perfect? No, but for what it's worth, that's why I put USA up there. We've actually been using this for decades. So the BMI has been around for a really long time. The United States has the highest average BMI when we look at middle adults, so adults who are about in their 50s to 60s, all the way up to 29. So 29 is the average BMI for older adults in this country, and that's the highest BMI on the planet. So we are number one. We are number one in something. No, but the good news is this isn't something that's necessarily inevitable. But it does happen to most people, and the trends do start to happen. Which brings us to our muscles. What is a sarcomere? Anyway, biology student. I'm going to put you on the spot. Well, this will hit home, maybe for you a little bit. But first, a little bit of a question for you. You've seen this guy's picture before. Any idea what those numbers mean? I actually had to change it this morning. I'm not kidding. The one on the right was a higher number until about literally 10 minutes ago. This is what I love about this field. Little details change all the time. Any guesses?
How long is he going to make us wait? I don't want to talk.
I've already said sarcomere. Yeah, you run track, right?
Yeah.
You have no idea? No, I'm like, pulling you out, not trying to shame you. I'm like, damn it! It has something to do with the world of track and field. All right, well, here is the 9.58. That's not bad. Here we go. There we go. Here's the 9.58.
There's the starter. Bolt got a good one. Engage right with himself. A soft foul. Bailey's there too. But here's Bolt. Bolt charging in front. Bailey's coming to catch him. Usain Bolt. Look at the time. 9.58 world record. I told you, Tom Heaven, we were going to see a 9.5 tonight. The wind is okay. In fact, ladies and gentlemen,
It makes it look so easy, right? So 9.58 is the world record for the 100-meter dash. That doesn't mean people stop running 100-meter dashes. Here's the other number. It's also a world record, by the way. You're playing the Rocky theme in the background. So 32.79 is the world. He literally shaved 10 seconds off of it. Before you guys came in here, it was like in the 40s, and I just Googled 100-year-old 100-meter record. I'm like, wait a second, there's a new one? I had no idea. This guy shaved 10 seconds off the world record. Pretty impressive. But the reason we see such a stark difference, right? You think, man, it's just 100 meters, but you see the focus in his eyes. He's like, he's going. It's almost like in his mind, he is Usain Bolt. But what's happened to him are three things. I don't know why there's a 1 by sarcopenia, and then not a 2 and a 3 by the others, but there are three major things that happen to our muscles as we age. And one is called sarcopenia, and this is sort of an image of this happening. As we get older, we do lose muscle fibers. Specifically, the muscle fibers that we lose the most are what are known as the fast twitch muscle fibers. Fast twitch muscle fibers are what Usain Bolt uses and relies on. Speed and strength. That's what fast twitch muscle fibers give you. The good news, by the time we're done with this PowerPoint slide, you realize there's a lot of good news. The good news is your slow twitch muscle fibers do not become eradicated or disintegrate at the same rate at all. So you have fast twitch muscle fibers, so sarcopenia is technically the loss of fast twitch muscle fibers in the body. A second thing, though, that happens that technically slows us down and maybe makes us appear, I guess, quote unquote, weaker. I don't know why I'm using air quotes. But why we might lose speed and strength is signals from your brain, from your nervous system to the muscle fibers themselves can be disrupted. The pathways. Think of a phone line that's existed for 100 years. The signals that run from your brain to your muscle fibers that tell them to contract can be disrupted. So a signal just might get interrupted. In other words, you might be telling your leg to do something, and it's just taking longer for that signal to go from point A to point B. So on the surface, you look slower. In your mind, you're Usain Bolt. When we watch you, things start happening. And the third, of course, your tendons. Your tendons become more rigid. So you put these three together, and we end up with an older body that's just simply slower. We lose strength and speed. Well, there you go. That's it. It was even up there. You might be surprised, though, how long we sort of see a plateau. Your overall, now of course you could change this if you enter into some type of workout program, et cetera, but for the average person, the sweet spot, so when do we see most world records broken for something like the 100-meter dash, and then so few? Right around the age of 25 is typically when a person's strength and speed peaks, typically. Of course there's variations. We have examples of people who cheat this. But typically our strength and our speed peak around the age of 25. But, like take Tom Brady, for example. Whatever, guy just wins everything. Of course, he's from freaking Michigan, which makes it even more exciting. You guys know how old Tom Brady is? Kind of like part of me was rooting for him, because it's just kind of cool. It's like 40, he was the same age as I am. So it's like, I could be out there. No, I couldn't. But of course, he hasn't had any really devastating injuries, right? That's why most football players will leave, not because they've lost everything and they're old, but they just got knocked around. Technically, I'm not really shocked. Now, if he gets injured, of course, all bets are off, because then he's injured and he's going to have a hard time coming back because he is older. But strength and speed-wise, there's actually no reason he shouldn't be able to keep going for another 6 or 7 years if he wants to. Because on average, a person's strength and speed plateaus up until right around the age of 50. I think a lot of us think it happens a lot sooner than that. Like, oh, we're just falling off a cliff, right? No. Again, as long as you do maintenance, and I'm sure he does the best maintenance possible that money can buy, your strength and your speed more or less plateaus. Of course, for someone like Usain Bolt, the difference between being a gold medal runner and not even being on the podium is like a matter of a tenth of a second, right? So in 10 years, he'll still be able to run faster than anyone in this room, but he still won't be able to make the podium, but he's still right there. So drop-offs, insignificant drop-offs until. Now, after the age of 50, though, for the average person, that's where we see that number 13. We see about a 13% reduction every single decade. But I think the surprising thing for people is how long that can last. Again, with proper maintenance. But of course, the good news. There is good news to this. The good news is your endurance and something we call your eccentric strength are maintained. I don't have the numbers, and it's easy to watch a 100-meter dash in class because it only lasts 10 seconds, and at the most 30 seconds. You want to watch a marathon? Let's all sit back and watch them. No, I don't want to watch one either. I even like marathons. I don't want to watch the whole thing. It's just too long. But if you're ever bored, just Google the world age-related world records in a marathon. It's freaking unbelievable. There are 75, 80-year-olds. I think I'm a pretty okay, maybe above average runner. I could never touch some of those times that they run in their 70s and their 80s. There's still 80-year-olds breaking the 3-hour mark in a marathon, which even good runners, you don't break the 3-hour mark sometimes in a marathon. I know it sounds unreal to some of you, like, what, 3 hours, that's a thing? Breaking 3 hours in a marathon is really, really, really good. And there are 80-year-olds who can still do it. It's unbelievable. But it's a good example of showing your slow twitch, your endurance muscles, your eccentric strength really does not fade that much as you get older. So that's the good news. You might not be able to be the same sprinter, but if you shift to longer distances, and it is kind of weird. This is like a nerdy thing from the world of running. This is sort of a natural progression. As runners, especially like middle distance runners get older, they do shift from shorter distances like the 800, and those 800 and 5K runners become really good marathoners. It's like they do this shift and they're still very good. So there's good news, but there is some bad news as well. Of course, there's always hope, but we'll get there. The bad news is, for some people, this does become sort of a self-serving, vicious cycle that they experience. Because you're losing fast twitch muscles, because your tendons are getting a little more rigid, because you feel like you're slowing down, what a lot of people do is they stop doing things. They stop exercising. Or they start believing that there's nothing I can do about this. Because it's harder. It is true. I mean, I'm in air quotes, only 43 years old. To you, that might seem really ancient. But the point is, I mean, I'll just be honest, I can feel the effects. I remember being a kid, and when I say kid, I'm thinking like 17, 18 years old. I remember like, you'd have like 2, 3 weeks off of doing nothing. Maybe it's like the off season. Give me a good 2 weeks, and I could get myself in shape for track season. Like, that's all I need. About 2 weeks, do some speed workout, boom, I'm right back where I now, oh my God, if I take 2 or 3 weeks off and do nothing, first of all, things are going to change. Like 2 or 3 weeks off now is like you gain 8 pounds all of a sudden, and holy cow. And the same process that took 2 weeks when I was 18 takes about 2 months now that I'm in my 40s. It can still happen. It's just, my God, but this is the vicious cycle people fall into. Because things get harder, they get this idea in their head that it's no longer attainable. And so they just stop. And we call this sarcopenic obesity. When people start to gain weight because they have the self-fulfilling prophecy that, well, there's simply nothing I can do. Well, now we're going to revisit. Remember Ernestine Shepherd? Here's a little bit more of her story, and then we'll connect it to the hope that's out there and the research behind what she does. Because she's certainly someone who did not fall into that cycle. Here's the longer version of how she accomplished it.
I really don't need an alarm clock to awaken me. I wake up at 2:30 every morning. I get up, I say my devotions, then I'll eat. I will eat 10 egg whites, they're scrambled, 16 ounces of water, and a handful of walnuts. I have a certain song that I sing every morning. My poor husband has to hear that. Oh, I can't sit down. Got to keep a rolling like the rolling sun. Oh, I can't sit down. Got to keep a rolling like the rolling of a sun. Make me laugh. Today I am happy and free. Nothing in the world is troubling me. Oh, I'm on my way. My husband said, "You better get on your way, girl." My name is Ernestine Shepherd. I am 77 years of age, and I am a bodybuilder. I had a sister. She and I were so close to each other. If you saw one, you saw the other. She came to me one day and she said, "Gee, we're sitting around, we're like couch potatoes, we need to do some exercise." And we decided that we wanted to take weight training. So we kept that going for a while. Finally, she came to me one day and she said, "You know what we're going to do?" She said, "We're going to be in the Guinness Book of World Records as two of the oldest female bodybuilders. And what's going to happen? We have something else. We'll be sisters." So we went on back and worked hard. But within a year's time, she said, "If anything were to happen to me, I would want you to keep this up." She was having some kind of health problem, but I didn't know that she was at the time. She had a brain aneurysm. When she died, I went to pieces. I didn't want to do anything. I ended up with high blood pressure, panic attacks, acid reflux, depression. It was just an awful way to live. But finally, one day, my sister came to me and she said, "Get up and do what I asked you to do. I didn't get up right away. It took me maybe a good 2 weeks after that. I made up my mind that I was going to fulfill the dream that my sister wanted.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big hand for this young lady. She was born in 1936, and let's figure that out for the start. Ladies and gentlemen, let's bring on Ernestine Shepherd.
After I did that show, I came in first place in my age category. It was maybe about a month later, my manager called me and he said, Guinness Book of World Records has called and said, yes, you are the oldest female competitive bodybuilder in the world. I do the same thing day in and day out. I eat the same way day in and day out. I drink 4 bottles of liquid egg whites a day. No high blood pressure medicine. No medicine for panic attacks. No medicine for acid reflux. And by me out running and walking, the depression and anxiety just I do it because I have to practice what I preach. I can't tell anyone to do anything if I'm not doing it. I started my class with 10 people in the class. That class has grown. Some mornings, everybody can't get in the room. Then I was really shocked when the men said they too wanted to train with me. You know, I know what I can do, but I want to help the others.
I'm so inspired by her. I am 66 years old, just celebrated a birthday, and I feel like I'm 21.
All right, and
Look
look
like
like
I'm 21. You see Miss Ernestine, she just going. And you're looking at her, and you say, okay, well, I'm 51, and she's, so you're like, something inside you is like, ah! It's deeper than just coming to this class and working out. It's deeper. She made me want to live again mentally. The spirit of this woman ran me back. I bless her and honor her because she's the greatest woman on this earth.
Most of the people in our community haven't done anything since gym in high school, and now you see this many people in the room working out. I mean, this doesn't usually happen.
And as we go out into communities, to churches, to the supermarket, wherever we go, we are examples of what she has put on the inside of us. And a lot of times we don't take time to put back and nurture our own selves. And that's so important because we impact the community so greatly.
Not everybody wants to be a bodybuilder. Not everybody wants to be a runner. But find what you like to do. And I say to my senior ladies and the men, don't forget, age is nothing but a number, and you can get fit.
Oh, I love watching. But anyway, that's pretty much 8 minutes of hope, hopefully. And again, at your age, you're probably not thinking, well, I got a while before I need to start things. But so here's the commitment, and here's the payoff. So what she's doing, it is remarkable. And I think it's mostly remarkable when people watch it because they think, That just sounds unreal. That can't be true. But here's the commitment that we see from the research side of what we can actually do. A commitment for a program. Let's say your 80-year-old grandmother gets this idea that she wants to get in shape. Is it possible? Yes, it absolutely is. It's going to take on average of about 10 weeks. So even someone who's 80, 90, 95 years old, about 3 to 4 times a week, and focusing on the strength training, doing 75% reps. Anyone know what that means? Most people that you see, I mean, well, maybe not most people, I should take that back, but a lot of people, it's been a while since I've been like a gym member. But if you ever go to a gym, there's always that dude in the back who's like literally lifting as much as he possibly can, and he's usually looking in the mirror and screaming, and he does it one time, and then throws it to the ground, and then, and he feels like that's the worst way to work out anyone could ever think of. 75% reps means, okay, what's the maximum you could do one curl with? All right, now reduce that by 25%. In other words, you should be able to do something 10 to 12 times and then put it down and feel exhausted. So 75% reps, that's different for everybody. So not everyone is doing the same weight, and that's not even something that's important. Working every single muscle group. So what you'd probably do in 3 to 4 visits is a different muscle group. By the end of the week, you've done every muscle group at least once, and then keep going. This has to be a commitment and really just a lifestyle change, not just something you do for 10 weeks, you're in shape. Oh, well, because if you stop, guess what's going to happen? It's all going to reset itself, and you're going to have to start all over. So this is something you have to keep going. But the payoff is actually pretty remarkable. When we look at the muscles of someone who is 80 and goes through a program, guess what they've done? They've actually rebuilt the fast twitch muscle fibers inside their body. They're actually regenerating themselves. So all those fast twitch muscle fibers that you lost over the decades are slowly being rebuilt. You're also losing weight in the right places. So there's weight benefits, there's bone benefits. Osteoporosis is something we worry about in older people, but you actually strengthen your bones by strengthening your muscles, because you're strengthening the tendons and there's more resistance getting applied to your bones. So they're like, hey, they're waking up too. So your bones get a lot stronger. I should have maybe bumped this up a little bit. The psychological gains are through the roof. So people's self-esteem, rates of depression, self-confidence, their self-image. And the amazing thing is there appears to be no age limit at all to the gains that someone can see going through these. But I get it. The stories, and this is just me talking. I guess I feel lucky in a way that I kind of fell into running as like my thing, because to be honest, it's a pretty easy thing to do. Like all you need is a pair of shoes, and some clothes, and I could just run, right? Well, what if basketball was like your thing? That gets harder, right? Even when you get older, playing basketball isn't as easy as running, because you need a court, you need more people, you need organization. So, but I think that's her message at the end. Is it doesn't matter if you're a runner. Not everyone wants to do that. Not everyone wants to be a bodybuilder, but find your thing and use that as your motivation to do it. So there's hope there. Well, finally, climacteric. No one gets what this is. No, that was dysthymia. We talked about that in the online lecture last time. All these fun diseases you're learning. Climacteric, now this is something that's absolutely 100% unavoidable. Climacteric is the slow winding down of a human being's reproductive capabilities. And I actually always start off the same way by talking about men, because this is something that, by and large, men never talk about. I never learned this in a health class in my public school system in 7th grade. I'm sure every single person in this room has heard the word menopause, right? We've all heard that. We probably all know what that means. You actually might learn something today that you didn't know about it. But how many of you have ever heard the word adrenopause? No, probably no one. In fact, until I started teaching this class, I had never heard that term. But adrenopause is the scientific term used to describe men's slow winding down of their reproductive capability. Now, the reason we probably don't talk about it as much, even though we should, well, one reason is because men don't talk about anything. But the second reason is it is true, it's not as dramatic and, I guess, what's the right word? Final as the process that a female goes through, but it's still very significant. So starting around the age of 40, most men lose about 1% of their testosterone per year. So we start to see a dip. Add that up over time, 1%, 1%, 1%. It's very significant by the time you're in your 60s and your 70s. What does this mean? Well, it's kind of a similar list that females will see. Oh, you probably already wrote all these down. I totally forgot they were up there. So like a drop in bone density. So men can also suffer from osteoporosis. That's true. A loss of lean muscle mass. Actually, what this means is when you lose testosterone, it becomes more difficult to gain lean muscle at the same rate. It's still possible. It just takes a little bit more time. Of course, the sexual libido could decrease. There's one that's actually not up there, which I meant to put up there, but I guess I didn't. Maybe autosave wasn't working. Growth hormone. Your growth hormone also dips as you lose testosterone 1% per year. So what that means, if you forget, it's harder to repair damage that's done. And then, of course, the two letters that every man fears, erectile dysfunction. About 1/3 of men in older age say they experience, and again, this comes from self-report, so who knows what the actual number is, but about 1/3. And there's also a new quote-unquote disease that's out there for men. I don't know how it got this name, but I guess I listen to a lot of talk radio. I'm not sure how many of you do. And of course, it varies from like NPR type stuff. So like a lot of sports radio. But I always listen to like the local sport radio channels, talk radio, et cetera, et cetera. This is all over those stations. Now mind you, who's their target audience, right? So guys that are like listening to ESPN all the time and things like that. I swear. So every 10 minutes they'll go through like a commercial cycle because it's talk radio. And at least one or two of those commercials every single time is to address the disease that I'm suffering from that's called low T. Anyone know what that means? Low testosterone. They've taken something that's perfectly natural and called it a disease so that they can now sell you a product to help battle those diseases. A lot of those products end up kind of looking like this.
You know, when I hit 50, my body went through a big change, and not for the better. Severe erectile dysfunction shattered my confidence, sent me into a depression, and almost ruined my marriage. And believe me, I tried everything. But then a friend told me about Zentrax, so I tried it. And it worked.
Zentrax is the strongest male enhancement drug on the market. It increases blood flow, boosts testosterone, and ends erectile dysfunction instantly.
So I asked my doctor about Zentrax, and he said, Zentrax? What the hell is Zentrax? And I said, Zentrax. It's the strongest male enhancement drug in the world, and it works. And he said he'd never heard of it. So I pulled up the Zentrax website and showed it to him. He started laughing. He said, are you insane, man? You can't put that junk in your body. It'll kill you. Your heart will stop. Rhino horn, ammonia hydroxide, that's what's in meth, right?
Zentrax is made strong enough to work on the most extreme cases of erectile dysfunction. And fast.
My doctor asked me, where'd you even hear about that? And I told him, a friend. And he said, well, what's his name? And I said, well, I don't really know him, actually. And he says, but you just said he's your friend. So I told my doctor, look, let's just forget about him and just write me a script for Zentrax, and I'll be on my way. My doctor said, are you deaf, man? No. I could lose my license. You could die. I said, yeah, I think I still want it, though, so give it to me. Write the prescription. I wasn't leaving. So he says, I think that website just froze my computer. So I grabbed him a little. And he goes, you're hurting me, sir. Zentrax works.
Side effects for Zentrax include fits of rage, acne, bleeding, baldness, blindness, whooping cough, hallucinations, coma, trouble swallowing, decrease in semen, increase in semen, nasal sores, constipation, vomiting, night terrors, amnesia, and suicidal urges.
And those are just the side effects they tell you about. I get the sweats, my bones are cold, my teeth are loose, my heart gets really, really hot. I can read minds. And sometimes I wake up driving a stolen car. My erections are fantastic. When I wear gray sweatpants, people cross the street, which is fine. Zentrax gave me my life back. Hail Satan.
So threaten your doctor or ask your ketamine guy about South African Zentrax today.
It works.
Yeah, so the take-home message, I guess in a humorous way, is be careful and always work with a medical doctor if you're taking any of those things. They're sold in lots of herbal stores, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But by and large, most of them are completely untested. And the side effects are all over the place. So careful with that, but just to know that it is out there. So the two, what does that mean? So erectile dysfunction doesn't happen, but guess what? The vast, vast, vast majority of cases, and again, you can purchase products that have been tested like Viagra, that's perfectly fine. But the main two drivers of erectile dysfunction in men is two things that are completely controllable by that man without taking some kind of medication. The first is hypertension. So do we know what hypertension is? Hypertension is a unsafe, elevated high blood pressure. Of course, it's the normal. So ways that you reduce that, of course, is things like exercise, et cetera. These are interconnected. The second main driver of erectile dysfunction is obesity, which, of course, it's hard to disconnect hypertension from obesity. So those are the main drivers of ED in men. So women, now we'll shift to you, and this will be the last thing that we talk about, and that would be menopause. So what is menopause exactly? Come on, ladies, have one guy in the room. I don't know if you talked about this in your health class or not. How long does menopause take? What is it? No ideas? Well, a lot of people are actually, this is at one point in the room where a lot of women in the room typically learn something. Menopause is the end. Menopause is just, right, we'll get to that. What most people are surprised, the actual whole process of menopause, for the average woman, when does it actually begin? Anyone know? About 35. 35 is the average age when it starts. Because most of us are completely unaware of the different stages that people go through. There are three distinct stages of menopause. Premenopause, something we call perimenopause, and then something called postmenopause. So premenopause usually starts right around the age of 35 for most women. Now you're thinking, I think the reason this is surprising is because you think of the symptoms of menopause, that you don't necessarily see these at all in premenopause. The only way you'd actually know if you're in premenopause is if you went to a doctor and got your hormones checked, because technically premenopause is like men. We start to see a very subtle drop off in the estrogen that's produced inside the body. About 1% per year, just like men. So it starts off kind of very similar, analogous to adrenochrome in men. Oh, when do a lot of women start having difficulty getting pregnant? About 35 and up. There's no question that these two things are connected. But your cycles are still normal. I grew up with 2 sisters, 3 stepsisters, and I'm surrounded by women in my house. I've been talking about menstrual cycles since I was 14 years old. But your cycles are still completely normal. In other words, there's nothing you would probably notice as a female that anything is even happening inside your body. But 35 is when this process actually starts to kick in. Now, right around the age of 45, so about a decade later, is when perimenopause begins. Perimenopause for most women takes about 3 to 5 years. And this is when we start to see those classic, sometimes stereotypical symptoms. But one of the most consistent symptoms that a lot of women start to experience is hot flashes. Have you heard of these? This is not something that's in a woman's head. This isn't something that they're just thinking is happening, but it's not. A hot flash happens when there is a sharp decrease, a momentary sharp decrease in the estrogen in your body. And sometimes they can be whole body hot flashes, or they can be very specific, like a spot on your arm, you feel like, oh my gosh. So hot flashes, let's name the most common symptoms. So hot flashes is a very common symptom during perimenopause. Night sweats and difficulty sleeping is a second symptom that a lot of women experience. And a third one that a lot of women experience, of course, is then usually the telltale signs. So if those don't happen, and by the way, hot flashes don't happen to every woman. And the things that are stereotypical, by the way, that are not on this list are things like extreme irritability and moodiness. Can that happen? Absolutely. But that's not something that I associated as a oh, this is going to happen. But the telltale sign is complete irregularity in your period, the cycles. You might miss a whole month. You might miss 2 months. Or 1 month, you might get 2 periods. Like, what? It's only been 15 days. In other words, there's complete irregularity in the cycle. That's really the telltale sign that the shift is happening, especially if you're about 45, 46 years old. And then by the time we're at 50, 50 is the average age that menopause actually happens. And menopause simply means you haven't had a period in a calendar year. That's all that means. So all told, it's about a 15-year process that women go through. From premenopause, no visible symptoms, perimenopause, that 3 to 5 year period where you do start to see symptoms. And then menopause is when it's been about a calendar year with no periods at all. And then postmenopause, of course, is, I guess, your life after that. I don't know why we called it a stage. It's just, okay, how'd that happen? But estrogen, it turns out, is a hugely protective hormone inside the female body. And so the drop that we do see in bone density, immune system function, and then risk for high blood pressure is a lot more significant than it is for men going through adrenocause. But that's because it's so much more final. Once it's done, it's done. Technically for men, it's like this slow descent that just never ends. For women, there's a slow descent, then you finally land your freaking plane. Men just keep, don't want to. At least you guys get to the airport and say, all right, let's move on. I never thought of that analogy before, but that makes sense inside my head. And this is just like trivia for your next cocktail party. You can write this down. But hot flashes, they've actually measured the surface temperature when a hot flash happens, if they happen to catch it. And you can see a 5 to 6 degree increase of where it's happening. So there actually there's heat emanating from the body. It's pretty wild. But I've never had one. I know plenty of people who have had them, and again, it just varies. Some women get them a lot, and other women, like, I never had one at all. So, but it is common. Any questions? Androgenetic alopecia, sarcopenia, and climacteric. 3 diseases of aging that are probably going to snag you to some degree at some point. Any questions? All right, well then go off, go build a snowman, enjoy your spring break. Spring break 21. But no, if you have any questions,